working out 4 to 6 times a week and you're still not losing body fat, this is probably why. And to give you a bit more context, the whole reason so many women these days are in these situations where they're trying with all of that effort, trying to lose body fat and still not progressing, is that we have this huge misunderstanding out there that so many people are marketing every single day, influencers, brands, whatsoever, that the only thing that counts when it comes to losing body fat is being in a caloric deficit. Or when you want to gain weight, being in a caloric surplus. But our bodies are more complex than that. We have things like hormones and complex biochemical processes that are going on. So our bodies are more than just a math equation. And that's not the whole story, especially for women. It's a more complex topic. So what I want to talk about today is that fat loss is not just about effort, which then leads to a lot of women out there doing 4, 5, 6 sessions a week, almost working out like elite athletes on top of their full-time jobs and taking care of their family. It's not just about effort, right? It's understandable to think and to assume if everyone says you just need to burn more than you're eating, but it's about sending the right signal to your body. It's not just about volume, but also about efficiency. Hey, my name is Phil. I'm a metabolism and fat loss coach. And in this podcast, I'm sharing the lessons I've learned coaching more than 100 women in their 30s and 40s lose 4 to 8 kilograms of body fat in just 12 weeks. Now, what happens when you confuse exhaustion with effectiveness, meaning you think the more I do, the better it is, and the more exhausted I am in the end of the week and in the end of the day, the more progress I will make, is that this stacks up. So it's not just training that increases your stress levels, because we know certain things are stressors. You've probably heard of that. If not, training is one of the things that short-term are a stressor to the body. And stress not in a way that it's something bad, but in a way where your body needs to be more alert, meaning cortisol rises. That essentially helps you elevate blood sugar so you have sufficient energy. It helps you be alert, right? It helps you be attentive, be focused. But the same thing also happens when you're working and when you're taking care of your family, when you have a lot of responsibility in general, because essentially cortisol is there to keep you alive, right? To keep you alert throughout the day and keep you awake. But also, the more responsibility you have and the more attentive you need to be, because that's the role of that hormone, the more it is being secreted. But if you're now working and you have business travels and you have not just a 40-hour work week maybe, but maybe even 50 to 60 hours, then that already actually forces you to recover like a professional, right? Then your main job is actually making sure that you can actually cope with that workload over time, because this is such a big stressor to the body to like be working 60 hours, have a family, have responsibilities, that you should already be taking care very well of yourself, right? It's not just something that pro athletes have to do, but you as well. And if you on top of that start working out like more than 3 times a week, then you really need to have your recovery dialed in, your food dialed in, and so on. But when the only thing that you hear out there is being in a caloric deficit, then of course this will lead to you doing more and then rather eating less. But you need to eat a lot if you're working out 4+ times a week, and then probably also in a progressive way where you're trying to add weight, where you're trying to increase your running pace if you maybe do some jogging or etc. etc. So right, this is a serious stressor for the body, and especially women are underestimating it because they just hear they need to be in a caloric deficit to stay lean, to stay toned. But the recovery aspect of the food is totally disregarded. So it's just the overall volume that stacks up, right? That leads to chronically increased cortisol, and that's then when you experience an increase in anxiety, when you're not falling asleep that quickly, you're waking up a lot of times throughout the night, you have more cravings. It's right, the survival mechanism that shows that your body wants to keep you alive, right? And also there's this great book, it's called Cortisol Connection. I'm not remembering the author right now, but it explains how cortisol, so to say, locks in your belly fat. So the more cortisol, you've probably heard that, right? Higher cortisol levels lead to more belly fat. And the reason for that as well is that, especially with belly fat, having increased cortisol levels lock in belly fat and lead to gaining more belly fat. So just being in a caloric deficit will of course increase that stressor, because again, less food is another stressor that you stack on top of all of that, and it just increases your cortisol levels even further. And on paper you should be losing weight, of course, depending on what everyone out there that is just preaching the caloric deficit all the time is saying, but it's not happening. And the reason is your hormones, right? The cortisol in that case. And then of course, metabolic rates are also super individual. So even if you're in a caloric deficit and you don't have that much stress, right? Like on paper, of course, you're losing weight when you're in a caloric deficit, but that's not true for everyone. Statistically, that's correct, because of course, if you take 200 people, you take 1,000 people and you do a study with them, on average, they will lose weight when they're in a caloric deficit. But you are not the average of X amount of people, right? If you have more stress, right? If you work more, if you have a family to take care of, and so on, then your stresses will just be higher. And that's even just the physiological response. It can also be that just genetically you burn fewer calories, because there's a lot of variation between individuals. It's not the same for every single person. So just because someone loses weight with X calorie number that you found in the internet that you're burning based on your gender, muscle mass, activity, and so on, doesn't mean that you will be losing weight at that same level as well, right? Probably you have someone in your close circle, right, that is just eating a lot but is not gaining any weight, and that's just someone who genetically burns more calories with a more active thyroid, right? Maybe with a cardiovascular system that just leads to them burning more calories, burning more glucose, burning more fats. That can be the case. So it's just not the same thing for everybody, and managing stress is just so crucial, because again, like if you just follow these tips and the advice that you find out there, work out more, be in a caloric deficit, eat less carbs, maybe eat less fats, all of the things, right, that you hear out there, all of that, it just leads to more stress, and then it makes it more difficult over time. I will now walk you through a weekly structure when it comes to your training that will allow you to prevent these increases in chronically elevated cortisol levels, but also make sure that you're losing body fat in a more sustainable and a more efficient, and especially time-saving way, so that you can enjoy your whole journey without you feeling like you need to force yourself to work out every single day and being in a caloric deficit and so on. So what we'll talk about before I walk you through the structure, and also really important from an understanding point of view, because I almost hear it every single day and at least every single week, which is the fear of getting bulky from strength training. And I'm saying that because part of that weekly structure will also, of course, incorporate strength training. And I'll also, of course, say why that is important. And when it comes to getting bulky, it's really about women mentioning that they don't want to look like huge and muscular and have these big round shoulders and this broad back, right? They don't want to look muscular. And what you really have to understand is that you're not gaining that kind of muscle overnight. And of course, you can also look bulky by like having a lot of body fat, which is also an option. But that's of course why we're here, right? That's why we're talking about the strength training, because it will help you lose more body fat over time. But when it comes to being bulky because you grew a lot of muscle, you're not going to do that overnight. That happens, it takes a long time. If you look at the guys at the gym maybe that you've seen that look so bulky, they have been trying to do that. A lot of people are also not successful trying that, because they're trying all over to eat a lot, to strength train a lot, and they're still not gaining so much muscle. So I'm just emphasizing here, it doesn't happen overnight. And even if you got bulky for whatever reason, which I highly doubt, because also as a woman it will be harder to grow a lot of muscle statistically compared to how easy it is for a man. And even if that happened very quickly, you could still reduce the frequency, right? How much you're doing your strength training. You could reduce it to once a week or once every 2 weeks, theoretically, if that happened. But the reason strength training really is so important when it comes to losing body fat over time is that we know, and it's not just about your health, right? Also from a health perspective, we know that it correlates with biological age. So you're going to stay healthy for longer and get older when you have more muscle mass, for example. You're reducing your chances of falling down on the ground, and that's also something really important. So you're just more capable as you're growing older, and as you're approaching your 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. So that's just out of that perspective, super important to do strength training, not just from like a visual and body fat, like fat loss perspective. But when it comes to fat loss, the reason strength training is so important, that we know that increases your resting metabolic rate. So the calories that you burn, right, sitting on the couch like I do right now, I'm burning more calories right now when I have more muscle compared to when I did less strength training, when I would have less muscle. And that's important because even though you shouldn't always be in a caloric deficit as outlined before, because it's a stressor for you, and especially if you have a full day-to-day life, responsibility and so on, you shouldn't do that on top of that, at least not all the time. When you want to be in a caloric deficit, this is going to be way easier because you're generally burning more calories at rest. So you're essentially increasing the output of your engine, right? If you would look at your body as an engine, like from a car, and you're burning more calories at rest when you have more muscle, because your body gets more energy inefficient. So you're heading more in the direction of being like a sports car or a sports bike that can go really fast. And they, of course, also when they're going slow, when they're driving very slowly, they're burning more calories. They're burning more fuel in their case. So that's where we want to go, because that makes the journey just overall easier, because you're burning more calories at rest, as I said. One of the reasons you're doing that is also that you're, for example, improving your insulin sensitivity. So your body's ability to pull sugar out of your blood with insulin. So you need less insulin to do its job, to do insulin's job, and distribute it through the cells where your glucose is needed. And that also, we know, is correlated with an increase in metabolic rate. So you're burning more calories when you're more sensitive toward insulin. The right weekly training structure that I've now been using for more than 5 years, working with women online one-to-one, and even before that, since 2019, also in person. It's all been high-achieving women, high-performing women, very busy women that have been traveling, have families. So it works within the constraints I mentioned also in the beginning of this episode, being very stressed, sometimes having little sleep because of children and so on. Works the following way, and I'm usually separating that in strength training and intervals, which sometimes is cardiovascular training, but usually it's all anaerobic training, so it's strength training and intervals. Strength training wise, and that of course depends on how much someone has been doing, and you can of course think about how much have you been doing the last years and where you want to start, is on the strength training side, 2 to 4 strength training sessions. So when someone is quite new and they've been working out 2 times a week, or even they've been working out 4 times a week but not so consistent, I'm starting them on 2 strength training sessions a week. That's usually whole body sessions. I'm not talking about the programs now in detail. There's like plenty free tips, training programs, and even free resources on my Instagram if you want more context on that. But 2 to 4 weekly strength training sessions that take, depending on how stressed someone is and how much time someone has, 40 to 60 minutes. Sometimes even just 30 minutes, right? That's like for extreme scenarios when someone is like super busy and doesn't have any time and really like is stressed, and then I'm doing 30-minute sessions with them. But 45 minutes is like this sweet spot for busy women that I'm working with. If someone has like a very relaxed time, right, they don't have children, etc., I also like to do 60-minute sessions, but usually it's these 45-minute sessions 2 times a week. And even though it's 45 minutes only, it's a stressor because we're increasing weights, we're making sure that the intensity is perfect for where they're at, as in how much are they going to their limit, right? So that's something that you need to measure. So you write down your repetitions, you write down your sets, and you go to your limit, as in you're not able to do another repetition after the end of your set. You go to that limit once per exercise per training session, which means if you're doing 5 different exercises or 4 different exercises for 3 such sets each, you have 4 sets in the training session where you're going to your limit. For each of the exercises, you're doing that once. And you're starting again with these 2 strength training sessions weekly. If you then, even if you would be super busy, right, if you're managing sleep well, right, your energy constantly is an 8 or higher out of 10, you're right coping well with, you're doing well with the nutrition and everything, then we can consider like bumping this up to 3 or even 4 strength training sessions, but that's already the upper end. And what I also like to do with all of the women that I'm working with is recommending an extra session that is just fun, right? Because this is all numbers, and then getting stronger, tracking repetitions and weights once a week anyway. So this shouldn't be your full training structure. your full weekly structure. Once a week, do something that's fun for you, right? If you love joining a running club, if you love, then you do that, right? If you love Zumba classes or certain dance classes or even martial arts, right? Sorry, whatever you like, whatever you like, you join that and do that once a week as well. So yeah, also have some fun and do something that with a bit less structure. It can also be tennis, golf, whatever you're into. On top of the strength training, I would like to recommend, and I in 99% of cases start off with just one of those, is doing interval sessions, and that's usually anaerobic alactic in the beginning, and then that can also be anaerobic lactic sessions. Don't mind the details for now, but there's like a 20 to 25 minute interval session. Today it will just be about the overall load and how much you should be doing in general. So you're starting off with 2 strength and 1 interval session, and that's not that little, right? It's already a lot, especially if you have a lot on your plate. And for also a lot of the women that I'm working with, I start with just 2 sessions, so it's just the 2 strength training sessions without the interval session. So that's like a weekly structure that can work quite well. And then again, if your sleep is an 8 out of 10 or higher, so you're not waking up throughout the night, you're falling asleep quickly, your energy in the morning when you wake up is an 8 out of 10 or higher, and you're consistently also progressing with your strength training, which is also a good sign that you're recovering well, then you can think about adding more sessions to that, but only if that's working and only if you don't have all of these symptoms like cortisol related, increase in cortisol levels related symptoms like feel anxious, right? Have a lot of cravings and so on. So if you don't have that much cravings, you don't feel that anxious, you're sleeping well, and these things go well and you're also progressing and losing belly fat, that's when you can bump up the amount of sessions. If you have all of that, right, the cravings, the anxiety, sleep issues, you're not losing belly fat, then that's not your sign to increase the sessions, but if anything, decrease it to 1 or 2 sessions a week. That's what you should do in that case. Make sure that nutrition is in check. Of course, I won't be able to give you like individual guidance for now, but right, if you're not making progress when it comes to losing belly fat, plus you have bad sleep, anxiety, cravings, and so on, your goal should not be increasing the sessions, but if anything, decreasing them so you can reduce the overall stress load, right? Because all of these signs, all of these things will not be solved by you just reducing your calories and like forcing that deficit even more. Chances are you're just stressed, you're in the survival mode, so you don't need to add more stress to that to get out of it. Obviously, right? When I'm saying it like this, like no one would really be considering something like that, but that's the advice that people get out there, right? You're not losing belly fat. Oh, you must be in a caloric surplus, right? You must be losing. No, probably you're just super stressed and your body is showing you that, but you're not able to listen anymore because the advice that you get out there brainwashes you into thinking that you just need to be more strict and more disciplined, which is just not true. Just not true. So that's like the weekly schedule that I like to start with: 2 strength training sessions, 1 interval training session. And for like super ambitious women, the upper end that I would really be considering would be 4 strength training sessions and 2 interval sessions. More than that, I would never do. And in that case, the strength training sessions would only be 40 minutes. So not more than 40 minutes, and interval training sessions 2 times 20 minutes a week. If you would want to do 6 sessions at some point, but that's already when you have like the nutrition dialed in, your recovery is good, you're really progressing, you're feeling good doing that. And then also that at least every other week, take a whole week off. You would need to implement deload sessions and so on. And of course, this is like generic right now. It's not individual to where you're at. So there's always exceptions to these rules, but I just like to give you like a rough framework, like from low end to upper end, so you know what's actually healthy and realistic based on my experience working with women in probably your situation in these last 5 to 6 years. So that's like what you can think of as something that is healthy, that can work. Of course, we're not talking about details. Again, the training programs, you'll find a lot of examples on my Instagram, but also there's free resources that I'm giving out. So check some of the posts and then you know how to get them. Then you specifically know how to do these training sessions. Something else, of course, that isn't training per definition, but that also is important, is your steps, right? Your daily activity, which also is important. And like one of the bigger reasons actually I'm recommending taking your daily steps is not because you're burning calories, but because we know it has positive impacts, of course, on reducing anxiety. The phenomenon of visual flow, like visual flow is like what we call when we're walking and we see like, because when I'm sitting right now, I just see this image of my office, of my room. But when I'm working, of course, I'm seeing different things. It seems like trivial right now. Maybe it is, but that visual flow essentially is shown to reduce anxiety and just make you feel better. And the more positive you are, the better you're going to progress, right? Because again, being negative and having anxiety is stress, which adds on top of the other stress causes of stress that I mentioned. So being in a good mood, seeing daylight is all super important. So 8,000 steps is like a nice goal that I like to have my clients hit. It's not that difficult, right? We're talking 40-45 minutes of walking, of course, depending on how fast you walk. But yeah, that's it. And what I just want to emphasize again, like the recovery part, the resting part, the feeling good, taking a breath, taking a walk, right? Sleeping, that's the part that specifically increases your metabolic rate, that helps you burn fat, and so on and so on. It's not the training itself that will lead to that. It's the right stimulus mixed with recovery, right? So focus on the recovery part, don't overdo it, and more is not more, right? Better is more. The difficult part about this is that you can watch all of these details, start with 2 sessions, go up to 4, and make sure that you're considering the things I just walked you through with your weekly structure, but still get in this state of increased cortisol levels where your belly fat is stuck, you have cravings, and so on. So a couple of pitfalls that people usually are falling into when they're starting with their training journeys is, on one side, the duration that I shortly mentioned before. So you don't want these sessions to last longer than 60 minutes, because 60 minutes is where we know, and of course, right, this is not individual, it's generic advice, but still it gives you like a good starting point. And I'll also in a second show you how you can learn for yourself what's true for yourself without always needing to look at a study to find out what you actually need to do. So 60 minutes is where we know statistically this will increase and spike cortisol levels way more than 45 or 50 or even 55 minutes of training will do. So 60 minutes usually is this mark where we know, okay, now this will increase cortisol levels. So you can just make sure that these 60-minute sessions, right, it's maximum 60 minutes per session. Another thing is the intensity, which I also mentioned before. And intensity, again, we want to go to the limit. If we have, for example, lower body training, 4 exercises in this lower body training, maybe even 5, and let's stick with the 4 for these examples. You have 3 sets, 3 rounds, so to say, per training, per exercise. So you're doing 12 rounds in total. You have only 4 sets in the training sessions because you have 4 exercises where you go to your limit. If you go to your limit, and we all know the people in the gym, right, they go to the limit every single set, especially men. They go to the limit every single set, they're out of breath, they're letting the dumbbells drop every single set, and that's too much, right? You shouldn't be going to your limit in every single set. And of course, also here's exceptions. If you're able to recover from that and then the next session you're able to progress, I highly doubt that, and it's like unlikely that this is true for you, but that's the case, you can like go to your limit in every single session, right? As much as you can recover from, but probably not. And like a good benchmark to follow in the beginning is going to your limit just once per exercise per training session. So if you do 4 exercises in your session, it's 4 sets that you go to your limit and not more than that. And then also the timing is a thing, right? Like ideally, that's right when your body temperature is the highest, it's like 2 hours after waking. That's theoretically the best timing for an exercise session, and where it like doesn't impact sleep negatively, where you actually naturally have the highest cortisol levels and so on. That's of course, that won't be possible because you're likely going to work in the morning, so you're not able to get up at 8 and then work out at 10, probably not possible. But what you want to make sure with the timing is, on one side, don't work out in a fasted state, right? Don't do it. Of course, there's exceptions, and when I worked with men in the past, they could do that and they would make progress with that. But for most women, they're not feeling good with that. It leads to more cravings later on. It leads to them like making progress slower and just overall also impacting sleep. From my experience, this is not scientifically proven, but I have a large database based on the work that I've done in the last 5 to 6 years. So from my experience, I can tell you, if you're a woman, especially if you're working full time, or even if you're not working, just taking care of children, but if you're working, don't do it, right? Like, don't work out in a fasted way. And even if you would do less like work, etc., had less responsibility, I would still recommend to eat before your training. So it's not even because of high stress or anything. It's just something to consider. Best timing, 2 hours after waking up in the morning. Then you want to finish your training session around like 3 to 4 hours before you go sleep at night, because we know like 3 to 4 hours after your training, cortisol is still increased. So if you're sleeping by 11, finish your training session ideally at 7, at 8 is still okay. And even if you finished your training session theoretically at 9, and if for you individually you're still able to sleep through the night and fall asleep within 5 minutes, you could still work out at 8, right, until 9. But for most, that's not the case. Most need like 3 to 4 hours. I personally need 4 hours to fully wind down. So just an example, personal anecdote, but the timing is also important. Like not right after waking, not depending on what it is. If you just go for a light run, you could even do it right after waking if you had some food, and not too late. Best timing is 2 hours after getting up, maybe for the weekend, just so you know. And then don't overdo it with the intensities. There's the other category of people in the gym that don't challenge themselves at all. They just like moving the weights and almost falling asleep, never really progressing the weight, and never really going to their limit, going to high intensities. That's of course also not good, because then there is no stimulus for your body to adapt, right? Then your body doesn't need to adapt, and it doesn't make any sense either. There's other signs actually that you can use to make sure, like, to see if you're on the right track and maybe even overtrained or under-rested, so to say, which is poor sleep, as I mentioned before, right? And I also like give you some personal examples that I actually use, but generally it's poor sleep, not falling asleep that quickly, waking up throughout the night, having more cravings, especially the belly fat being stuck. If you're a woman, having more premenstrual symptoms like more cramps, more intense pain, right? Just not feeling so good, being even more aggressive, more anxious before your period. And there's like all signs that you're in this state of overtraining and that's just too much and that you're not recovering well. And that's what you can also use. Always being sore is also like one of these typical symptoms that you can use to gauge whether you maybe did too much or too little, right? I don't know. What I personally use is actually my skin, and also my, how do you call it, right? If you have like this inflammation in your mouth and you feel like there's something swollen and very sensitive and it's in pain, like it just inflamed the flesh in your mouth. I'm not sure about the English name right now, but that's something I use to gauge whether I'm maybe more inflamed, overtrained. Sleep is something that I'm very sensitive towards, and also anxiety, as in I tend to be very like having more negative thoughts about like everything when I'm overtrained or didn't sleep that well. And also my skin, so I get like these pimples in very specific funny places next to my ears, for example, when I have certain things going on, like where I sleep, I know exactly where I'll get like some skin issues. Too much training, I know exactly what will happen. So my task for you is that you need, next to like the statistics and the studies that I'm mentioning, you need to learn for yourself when it's too much, and you need to learn to listen to your body. And just hearing every single day that you need to be in a caloric deficit and that you shouldn't be lazy and I don't know what, of course doesn't help with that, because it's like no, just do that, just look at the numbers, like just you have to do at least 10,000 steps, you have to do at least XYD. No, you don't need to do all of that, right? Like none of that. You have to learn to listen to your body. Of course, if you're not working out at all and you're not doing 1,000 daily steps and you're just eating way too much, but very likely you're not in that situation. So listen to your body, learn what's the symptoms that you personally experience, ideally even before you experience these cravings, right? Because that's already one stage ahead. Like, be very attentive. Like, look at your skin. Like, just using my example right now, maybe you feel some joint aches and pains, or you feel more stiff in a certain area of your lower back. Also, something very typical when you have too much stress, etc. Like learn to listen to your body and then adjust sleep and so on. Decrease the training volume. Don't challenge yourself that much if you're in that situation. But then also like do not always be negative. Some signs that you're on the right path would be, for example, that you're able to progress in every single session. You're able to use more weight. The weight feels lighter. You're feeling good in the morning. You're waking up with high energy. You're falling asleep quickly. You're sleeping through the night, right? You don't feel bloated. You don't have so much water retention. Your belly doesn't feel so puffy anymore, right? You have maybe less cramps, less pain during your period. And these are like all signs that you're managing stress better. Of course, these things can all come from different other things as well, but generally this stress thing is like a meta problem that affects everything else. So that's something, regardless of where you're at in your journey, this will be relevant for you. So yeah, that will be the last thing for today. Listen to your body. Make sure to learn what your body tells you. Like just be attentive. Your body already has all the information, right? You don't need anything out there. Learn to listen to your body. And last but not least, if you found any of that episode helpful today, it would mean the world to me if you shared it with a friend so they can learn from it as well. If you scroll up, subscribe to my podcast, give me a 5-star rating, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one.